Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My dear grade 8 students, welcome to Ali Public School. This is Muhammad Ghanim sir. I'll be doing a very beautiful chapter today. It's called Anandi by Gopal. It's an autobiography. So this is Muhammad Ghanim sir. I'll be taking you through the chapter today. Be with me and stay tuned. So dear students, as you can see on this slide, you have a picture of a lady, and this lady is none other than Dr. Anandi Bai Gopal. Okay, uh, to be very clear with you, it's a very special chapter because she happens to be the first Indian woman to become a doctor. Okay, and she was the first lady doctor to qualify as a doctor from USA in 1886. Now, coming down to the text here, see it's written here, an autobiography is a story of a person's life written by the person himself or herself. That means, so the story that you see today, that I'll be taking you through today, it's written by herself, which is Anandi Bai Gopal. While a biography is a story of a person's life written by someone else. Okay, now we'll be reading this particular autobiography on Anandi Bai Gopal. Okay, and how did she become a doctor? What was the difficulty faced by her? And what actually motivated her to become a doctor? So all these things we'll be taking in the subsequent slides. Be tuned with me. As you can see, in the first paragraph, it talks about the family background. Anandibai came from a very rich family. They were all landlords. That means they were owning a lot of land, and they had a lot of wealth. But of late, they had lost their riches. That means wealth. Okay, now let me talk to you about the early traditions in those days. Those days, the woman was getting married at a very young age. Likewise, Anandi got married at an age of 9 years, and her name was changed to Anandi because the family of the husband, they wanted her name to be changed, and so it was changed to Anandi. Now, let's talk about in the second paragraph of how her husband wanted Anandi to pursue education. Now, before marriage, she could barely read anything. Marathi. See, it says Marathi because, like we have Kannada in Karnataka, the same way Marathi we have in Maharashtra. So she was hardly able to read anything in Marathi, and education was not very common then, and especially in the girls had a lot of problems, as far as education was concerned, because the men in the society never supported the idea of a woman getting educated. But here, as you see, the Gopal Rao, who happens to be the husband of Anandi Bai, he was an ardent supporter of widow remarriage and women's education. Okay, now why we say widow remarriage? Because in those days in Hindu normal traditions, the widow, that means a woman who has lost her husband, she was not getting married again in her entire lifetime. But Gopal Rao, he was a very progressive thinker. He thought of the future and he was a supporter. He said that yes, the woman, even if she is losing her husband, she should get married again and she should make her life a good one. And not only he supported widow remarriage, he also supported women's education. Now, after the marriage happened, Gopal Rao himself started teaching her. Okay, and it was quite difficult because in those days, the husbands were hardly talking to their wives in front of the others. So, let alone talking about the education and teaching the woman or wife for that matter. Okay, in the beginning, uh, her husband Gopal Rao tried to get her admitted in missionary schools, but it didn't work out actually. And then so they had to move out from Kalyan to Alibag, and from Alibag to Kolhapur, as you can see in the picture. Gopal Rao is coming out of the university or the school, girls' school, in Kolhapur. Okay, and even there he was not able to, uh, he was not able to give proper education. So finally, what Gopal Rao did, he took Anandi Bai to Calcutta, where he was absolutely free and he had the entire liberty to teach Anandi Bai. So this is how the struggle of Anandi Bai was. With the husband, actually going from places to places in the search and pursuit of education. Now this is what the second paragraph is about. Now let's come to the third paragraph. The third paragraph is talking actually about why Anandi Bai decided to become a doctor. Now, now let's come to the earlier paragraph. After her rapid progress, rapid means quick progress, the husband was insistent. That means insistent means telling Anandi Bai again and again that Anandi Bai should acquire higher education because Gopal Rao saw the talent in Anandi Bai. She had the capability of getting educated further. So in those days there were no female doctors in the country, and there were many women who were not reluctant. Reluctant means who were not ready to go and get herself treated from a male doctor. So as a result, the woman in the society had to suffer and go through a lot of pain because of this. In fact, Anandi Bai herself had lost an infant son. Infant means just when the son was around 3 to 4 months, she had lost her son because there were not proper treatment from the doctors. And at that time, she was only 14 years of age. So, looking into all these difficulty of her own and the difficulties of the woman in the society, she decided firmly to become a doctor herself and to help the woman in her society. So this is why Anandi Bai decided to become a doctor. So my dear students, as you can see, uh, Mr. Gopal Rao was trying very hard to get me, means Anandi, you know, to get an admission into some university in America. Okay, uh, but then it was quite difficult. He was not getting through with the admissions in any university, and they hardly knew anyone in America. So what happened was here, Mrs. Carpenter Roselle Mrs. Carpenter of Roselle, and it's a place called New Jersey in America. By chance, came across this story, and she was very moved. Moved means she was very sympathetic. She wanted to help her, uh, and she what I mean, she wrote a letter. Why with a correspondence? Correspondence means writing. She wrote a letter to Anandi back in India, and she told them that she wanted to invite them to America, and then Anandi could stay in her own house. Okay. Uh, unfortunately, Gopal Rao was not able to get a job there. So eventually, what happened was Anandi Gopal went by herself alone, and she was hosted. That means she was basically taken in by Mrs. Carpenter. Okay. Now, back in India, there were a lot of opposition, as you can see in the picture for demonstration, I put it to you. There were a lot of opposition and criticism, that means people were not happy. They were expressing their unhappiness. The unhappiness, people expressed to an extent that they were throwing stones, cow dung at this husband and wife because they were not very happy on the idea of Anandi being getting educated. So after a lot of difficulties, trials means difficulties, tribulations mean difficulties again. In finally in 1883, she reached America and she was taken up by Mrs. Carpenter. Now Carpenter, was so lovely as a woman, and she loved Anandi so much that Anandi used to call her Carpenter Maushi. Maushi means, an aunt, a mom's brother. Okay, now this is what we talked about in this paragraph. Now let's come to the second paragraph. The next paragraph here. It talks about the change in the customs. Okay, when Anandi reached America, there were quite a few things that she found very strange. Very strange means unusual, that the carpenters were doing. For example, the carpenters found it odd, that means unusual, that Mrs. Anandi Gopal wouldn't sit down. She would stand up on the chair, when Mr. Carpenter was in the room. And as a custom in India then, and she was surprised that, the English people, see, Anandi was surprised that, these American people, they didn't take shower or they didn't take baths every day. Okay. I mean, there were quite other things which she found strange, that, the clothing style, and, they were eating non-vegetarian food. Uh, and I mean, these are all things that Mrs. Anandi Gopal found very unusual. But in spite of all these things, Carpenter Maushi, Carpenter, Anchi Carpenter, she took proper care, as if Anandi was her own daughter. Okay. And when the time came, when she had to bid a farewell, she had to see off Anandi to the college in Philadelphia. She was literally crying. That was the attachment that Mrs. Carpenter had with Anandi. So, my dear students, finally, Anandi was able to reach the university. It was in another state of America. It was called Philadelphia. Okay. Now, the good thing in the university was that the superintendent and the secretary of the college, who were the high-ranking officials of the college, they were very kind and polite and sympathetic to Anandi. Okay, and they were very impressed with the fact that Anandi had come so far, battling the poverty and opposition from the people. Okay, by having these things in mind, uh, these people offered Anandi a scholarship. Scholarship means a fee. As you people know what scholarship is, the university paid for her tuition fees, which amounted to $600 at that time for 3 years. Okay, so this is a good news for Anandi. But then, along with this good news, there were some difficulties that were not leaving Anandi. The very first difficulty was about the difficulty in the hostel room. Now, what was the problem here? As you can see in the picture, it was a very cold place. America is a very cold place, and to keep the rooms warm, you need to have a fireplaces. But then, if the fireplaces are, broken, or if they are not in proper order, what will happen is these fireplaces will emit smoke within the room itself. And if the source, I mean, if the room is filled with the smoke, obviously, there will be a lot of problems and health issues and congestion in the chest for the people who live in that room. Now, here, the room that was provided to Anandi at the college did have a proper fireplace. Okay, and the fireplace emitted a lot of smoke when it was lit. So, when the fire was burnt. So, I mean, either it was a choice between smoke and cold. Okay, if she stays in the room, she stays warm, but the problem is she has to face the smoke. But then if she is going out of the room, what happens is she has to face cold. And here, back in those days, and therein, the temperature was extremely low. It was unbearable outside. So she stayed back into the room. Okay, I mean, she tried to get other places, but that was not possible, as there was nobody ready to rent a room to a brown Hindu girl trying to become a doctor. You know why? Because back then, even today, the white people in America, they have feelings, they have a feeling of superiority, and they tend not to. I mean, there are some people who are called also racist. They tend not to help out the people who are not from the race. So this is what happened, and Anandi had to suffer because of it. After 2 years in that place, and after 2 years in that place, Anandi started getting constant temperature. That means she started getting ill, and she started developing cough, and living in the alien culture. Alien culture means, a culture where you are not accustomed to, a culture, which is different from your own culture. It is called alien culture. Weather was always going to be difficult, and you know and she was ready to face it. So she took her through all these difficulties. You understand me? So although she fell ill, but then she didn't give up. Okay. Now, because of that, what happened was, you know, she started, getting severely affected by the smoke. And after around 2 years, there were certain spells when I used to feel faint. Certain spells means all of a sudden, she used to faint, matlab chakkar aa jana, and she was getting very high temperatures. Why? Because the internal respiratory system in Anandi was badly affected because of the constant smoke that she was inhaling. Okay, and then the cough that she had, it never left her. Okay, by the end of 3 years, Anandi's condition had become from bad to worse. It was very bad. Okay, but then she somehow took herself, pushed herself, through the final exams. And at the convocation means a day, in a function where the degrees of the students are distributed. At the convocation, where the husband Gopal Rao was also present, in the program, it was announced that Anandi was the first woman doctor of India, and because of which she got an standing ovation. What is a standing ovation? People who were out there in the function, they all stood up in respect of Anandi and they clapped for her. You understand? So it was the most rewarding moment. That means it was the most rewarding moment. That was the best prize that she could ever imagine in her lifetime that she got on that day. And that prize came in the form of respect from people, recognition from people, recognition not only by the people of America, recognition also by the people of India and throughout India. But then, unfortunately, what was happening was, as the days were passing by, the health condition was not getting better. It was only getting worse. So, what my husband did, Gopal Rao, he admitted Anandi into a women's hospital in Philadelphia, and herein she was diagnosed. That means doctor told her that she had tuberculosis. Tuberculosis means, it's a kind of a disease. It's a kind of a respiratory problem, because of which the chances of living, becomes very meager. That means, as in you say in cancer, people, I mean, that the survival chances are very low. Similarly, the tuberculosis she had developed in her body, and the doctor advised Anandi, to go back to India for her treatment, as they were not able to treat her. So, my dear boys, let's talk about the return of Anandi back to India. Here, what happened was, as you know, the condition of Anandi had worsened. Okay, and those days there were no aeroplanes. People had to travel on the ship. Okay, now when she boarded the ship along with her husband, of course there were some doctors on the ship as well. But then, in spite of the bad health conditions of Anandi, the doctors on the ship, they refused to treat Anandi. You know why? Because these doctors were white doctors, and they had racism, they had a feeling of superiority, and they refused to treat Anandi on the ship. Okay, now finally, at a point, she reached India and she stayed at her cousin's house in Pune, where she wanted to receive treatment from a renowned Ayurvedic doctor. Okay, renowned Ayurvedic doctor. Okay, but then even the doctor in India refused to treat her, as the doctor felt that she had crossed the boundaries of the society. That means, woman education in India was not very supported by men, and he was among those men who didn't really support women education. And thinking, having this idea in mind, this even doctor, Ayurvedic specialist, he refused to treat Anandi. But then, unfortunately, my dear boys, finally, on the February 26, 1887, frustrated, that means, very disappointed, all her achievements were in vain. Were in vain means in a waste. Okay, Anandi succumbed to her disease. That means she died of her disease at an age of 22. Okay, she was mourned. She was mourned means people throughout the country, they felt sad and they felt the sorrow for her. Okay, her ashes. You know what her ashes are? Ashes means in Hindu rituals, when someone dies, they burn the body, and the leftover after the burning of the body is called ashes. Her ashes, the leftover of her body after burning of the corpse of Anandi Bai, they were sent to Mrs. Carpenter, who wanted to place the ashes in the family graveyard. Cemetery means graveyard in Poughkeepsie. Now, this Poughkeepsie is a place in New York City, in New York City, in US. Okay. Now, this is what it's talking about the return to India. Now, let's come to the 10th paragraph. Finally, okay, here it says that Anandi's efforts were not in waste. Okay, to this day, even today, she is an inspiration. To today, there are so many doctors, women doctors in the entire country. And because Anandi was the first doctor, first woman doctor who was educated abroad, she is an inspiration. I can challenge you. I am sure each and every person, each and every woman who becomes a doctor in India, you understand, they are very familiar with Anandi Bai's achievements in life. Okay, now she made us believe that whatever the situations and the circumstances may be, if you have a dream, you can definitely achieve it. Nothing is impossible and nothing is unachievable. And this is and each of us has the potential. Each of us, we have all the capacity, to achieve whatever we wish in our lifetime. Today, Maharashtra government has a fellowship. Fellowship means it is supporting the people, supporting the students, undergraduation students who are pursuing medical studies financially in her name, and for young women working on women's health. Okay, so this brings us to a very inspiring chapter of Anandi Bai. I'm sure you have understood the chapter. Should you have any difficulties or any problems, please feel free to contact me. As you see, there is a special graveyard in Poughkeepsie, in New York, United States, in the grave. Here it's mentioned Anandi by Joshi. This is in America, and it says 1865 to 1887, first Brahmin woman to leave India to obtain an education. Okay, so with this we finish the chapter Anandi. Thank you, my dear students. Thank you for being with me. Merci means thank you in French. Thank you very much.